Hello there, listeners of the Bylines Network podcast. We started with England, then Scotland, and unsurprisingly, it's Wales up next. I'm Julian in Bristol.
I'm Chris in London.
I'm Charles in Bridgend, South Wales.
So, as I so subtly hinted in the intro, listeners, we're talking about the Welsh national elections. Welsh voters will be going to the polls to elect their representative in the Senate. Charles, do you just want to tell us a bit about how the Senate works and what exactly the devolution powers are? Because I don't think some of our listeners in England will know.
Okay, well, the Welsh Assembly, or the National Assembly for Wales, as it was originally, was set up in 1997, or the referendum that enabled it took place in 1997. If you reverse 97 to 79, which is very helpful for my brain cells, in 1979 there was an unsuccessful referendum when the opportunity for devolution in Scotland and Wales was turned down by the population in both places. I think, if I remember rightly, it was a long time ago, that was quite a marginal vote in Scotland, but it was a heavy vote against devolution in Wales. That switched around between 79 and 97. It totally switched in Wales. Totally and a bit. There was a tiny majority in favour of devolution in 1997. The last constituency to declare was Carmarthenshire, and from a losing position, I think devolution was won by a total of 11,000 votes out of a million and a bit. So Carmarthenshire got all the credit for that, but the real work in switching that vote around between 79 and 97 was done in the industrial areas of South Wales, and that was done by the Labour Party. The Labour Party deciding it wanted devolution. And in 1997, devolution was also very much part of the European movement. Devolution was set up as something which would make Wales a European place, a place where European funds could come to Wales directly without being gatekeepered by politicians in London. And it would give European culture to Wales, enable Wales to take part in European culture, European education exchanges, and so on. So the way I see devolution in 1979, I think the voters then saw it as a sort of a balkanization, Wales going it alone. In 1997, the thought was very different. It was Wales becoming devolved as part of a Europe-wide movement called at the time the Europe of the regions. So 1997, because of the very small majority in favour of devolution, there had to be quite a bit of consensus between the devolutionists and the non-devolutionists about the powers given to Wales, and they were quite modest powers. Wales was looking after its own health service, its own planning, its local councils, and a certain amount of economic levers as well, microeconomic local levers, regional development, and that sort of thing. Things like housing, education, and, as I said earlier on, the NHS, which easily takes up about half the budget. So it was a relatively small affair in 1997 or 1999 when the first assembly met, but that has sort of expanded over the years. We've now got some primary legislation powers. We only had secondary legislation powers to begin with. And there's a further expansion this time in that the Senedd, or the Parliament as it's now called, is no longer just an assembly, it's called a Parliament, Senedd in Welsh. That's going to have now 96 members instead of the 60, all elected by a full proportional representation system called the closed list system, which we might talk about a little bit later on.
And you mentioned there this year the increase of seats, not seats, members, to 96. So am I right in saying there's 16 constituencies at the moment, and they're going to get 6 each? So how is that going to sort of change what it is now? Because it under the sort of Westminster the system, which is sort of where my main understanding and familiarity lies, who would I write to about? Would I pick any of the 6? You know.
The correct answer to your question is, who on earth knows? Nobody knows, really. Nobody knows what's going to happen. It's a closed list system. It's very European in one way. I'm half Spanish, and I've got Spanish nationality, so I get to vote in some Spanish elections. And I think I'm right in saying it was the regional parliament where I come across this closed list system. And what happens there is that you don't vote for an individual candidate by name. You're presented with a list of candidates and you vote for a party. You might or might not know the names on that list. And especially if they're down at number 4, 5, or 6, they might be quite obscure people. So you are voting for a party rather than individuals. So it really breaks the link between the voter and the candidate or the elected member. Now, when I'm doing this in the Spanish elections, I don't like it. It gives me a bad feeling. I think I'm just endorsing a list that has come from what we used to call smoke-filled rooms. So I think this list has been pre-prepared, and all I'm asked to do is to tick it and put it in this box and not put it in that box. And I haven't got any power over which of those persons actually gets elected. Now, funnily enough, I think that's going to benefit one of the parties that's standing this time, because there's one party we all hold close to our hearts, and we know them very well. They're a two-issue party. They're worried about small boats, and they're worried about a 20 mile an hour speed limit in parts of residential areas of Wales. So those are their two issues. And the fact that most of those candidates are strangers, I think they were scooped up from that bar on a distant planet in Star Wars and brought to Wales to stand in a local. Nobody knows who these people are. So in a strange sort of way, that's going to benefit this lot, isn't it? Because there isn't that direct link with the elector, between the elector and the candidate anyway. So my guess is that this is going to be the first and last time that we have closed lists. I'm pretty sure that whoever gets in, and the opinion polls are telling us that this won't be a Labour majority, not by any means. It's probably going to be a Plaid Cymru administration in coalition with the Greens, possibly with the Lib Dems. But one of the quirks of the closed list system is that it starts punishing smaller parties quite quickly. So if you're Labour, if you're Plaid Cymru, if you're Reform, regrettably, those are going to get the first round of seats. So there'll be a bit of competition then for the second round. Greens will get those. Lib Dems are likely to be crowded out, and it's looking as if Conservatives could be crowded out as well. So it definitely has a little bit of a bias towards larger parties.
Going on to like the big question then, same third verse, same as the second verse. Correct me if I'm wrong on this, but I am right in saying that Labour have ruled Wales for basically 20 years since the Senedd first became a thing. Do you think Labour, not, as you said, not getting a majority will hurt them more here than it would in other areas, such as they're predicted to lose big in London and lose some seats in Manchester?
Labour's always been the single biggest party over the last 25 years. It hasn't always had an overall majority. The outgoing Labour government didn't quite have an overall majority. It's depended on a single Lib Dem vote. There was a formal coalition at one stage between Labour and Plaid Cymru. So we have had full-blown coalition, and then we've had sort of pacts and electoral understandings. So it hasn't been a clean sweep of Labour having an overall majority all the way. It's more nuanced than that. We did get used to a coalition, and I think it's looking as if there's going to be some sort of coalition, or certainly some sort of inter-party understanding after May the 7th. The big question is whether Labour will want to be involved, whether Plaid Cymru will need them to be involved. And we can only wait and see. Nobody knows. I think a lot of money is being bet on Plaid Cymru plus the Greens being a coalition. If there are any Lib Dems elected, then I could see those people joining this coalition. On some of the polling figures, it looks as if that coalition still wouldn't be big enough to have an overall majority. So there's a possibility they might need to talk to Labour. It's a question then of whether Labour get the hump after not being elected again and don't want to cooperate.
It is kind of crazy that sort of we're seeing this shift now. And maybe if we look at the reasons why, we might not be so surprised. But I mean, I read a figure today that in Wales, that Labour have come first in every general election since 1922. It just seems like such a massive reverse of fortunes since only even 2 years ago from the last general election that we had. What do you think? And obviously, there's been a couple of changes of leader in recent years in Welsh Labour, with some controversy over, I think it was Vaughan Gethin. What do you think are the sort of the reasons why people are switching off from Labour in Wales?
There's all sorts of very complicated reasons. What's very big amongst political scientists right now, it's very fashionable, is to look at people's identity. And there seems to be some sort of correlation between how people identify themselves and how they vote. And that seems to have got a certain amount of predictive value. So if Welsh people think of themselves as being British, then they're going to be more open to voting for British-wide parties, such as the Conservatives. If they think of themselves as being Welsh, then they're going to naturally drift towards Plaid Cymru. And there seems to be quite something in that sort of correlation. But correlation isn't the same thing as cause. There are also causes and effects. And we know that in the Brexit referendum, for example, people were asked a question, but they gave answers to another lot of questions. No, they weren't happy with results of austerity. They weren't happy with this, that, or the other. And it somehow got blamed on to Europe or European bureaucrats. So I think there's a whole lot of things going on. I do think there's something wrong with Labour nationally. Well, I don't think we know it. There's something wrong with UK Labour, isn't there? I would call it the Mandelsonisation of the Labour Party. Nationally hasn't done as much, hasn't done the Labour Party much good at all. Welsh Labour, well, in Wales, it isn't the Labour Party; it's the Welsh Labour Party, and it was Rhodri Morgan who insisted on that name change. So there is a little bit of a red water, you might call it, between Cardiff Labour and London Labour. Eluned Morgan and her predecessor, Mark Drakeford, tried to underline that difference in many ways. For example, by not obeying the Pact of Silence on Europe. They were both very keen to stress that Wales ought to be part of Europe and always has been part of Europe. So there are some differences then between Welsh Labour and UK-wide Labour, but that doesn't completely inoculate Welsh Labour against the general trend, which we can observe now against some of the huge mistakes which Starmer and Reeves made in the first 6 to 8 months of their time in government. We've learned now that number one mistake was appointing Mandelson. Also, the first people that Reeves targeted were the pensioners with their winter fuel allowance, and the third child benefits cap, and all sorts of reversals and changes of minds.
So you don't think so much. So you think the sort of drop in support is more to do with sort of the National Party more so than sort of Labour's record in running Wales?
It's difficult to say which is the most influential. My feeling about the changes in the Labour Party in Wales is that, funnily enough, when we had first past the post and there were a lot of safe seats, the Labour Party put equal effort into safe seats as they did in marginal seats. So they treated all their seats the same, basically. They had excellent organisation. They had all the paraphernalia of knocking doors, delivering leaflets, and on the day of the election, having everything properly organised. That's always been done everywhere. They've never ignored a safe seat and thought, oh, we'll just leave that to its own devices. They've had the Labour Party machine going on everywhere. Now, my perception is that has been lost. We've lost a lot of volunteers willing to go around and knock doors. And the reason for losing those volunteers comes mainly from the perceptions of London-based policies, I think, rather than Wales-based policies. So if I wanted to point the finger, I would point it at, in policy terms, at London, but in terms of getting people out and actually getting people interested in the party, in the Labour Party, and working for the Labour Party, there are local effects there. If you look at a group of Labour people now going around knocking doors, most of them are on some sort of Labour payroll. They're either county councillors, so they're, if you like, semi-professional politicians. We don't get the huge voluntary movement that we used to have. That's my perception, anyway.
You hinted at like what the wider narrative is earlier. Do you think that there is any truth in people are feeling a bit more Welsh in their identities now, and that's why they're voting for Plaid Cymru, who I found out when we talked to our Welsh correspondent last year, only recently was a Welsh independence party. Do you think there is any truth to that narrative?
Yes, there is. I think, well, if people are switching to Plaid Cymru, then it's self-evident, really, that there is that feeling there. What's been lost is the Welsh-European idea, and that's been very, very strong up until Brexit. Obviously, now Wales was an anomaly amongst the other devolved administrations in the Brexit referendum. London voted strongly for Remain. Scotland voted strongly for Remain. Northern Ireland voted for Remain. Wales was the odd one out. It wasn't hugely out. It was like the whole Brexit referendum. It was a small margin. But nevertheless, Wales voted leave. And of course, the Brexit people never let us forget that, do they? So something went wrong. Something went wrong in Scottish minds, I think, and in London minds and in Northern Ireland minds. Being Northern Irish or being a Londoner or being Scots went hand in hand with being a European. But that link, that psychological link, somehow got broke in Wales, to some extent anyway. And so Wales went along with large parts of England who blamed Europe for things which are actually done by austerity and the banking crash and privatisation and Thatcherism and all the lovely policies that the Conservatives inflicted on us. Really, there's been no investigation, no political scientist that I know of has looked into the reasons why Wales was that exception amongst the devolved administrations in the Brexit referendum.
Leading on from that point, would you say that people's support of Brexit, with Wales sort of voting a majority for Brexit, what's the sort of reason potentially for that not directly translating into support for, Nigel Farage and reform? Because I've had a look at sort of some polling over the last few days on people's sort of opinions of the political parties in Wales. And YouGov had found that 49% of Welsh people would not like to see Reform UK as part of the next government in Wales. Sort of why is that support potentially not there if a majority voted for Brexit in 2016?
I'm wondering whether that perception that Reform is so popular, is that a correct perception, or is it something we get from social media where it's so easy to look at a complex problem and just and then your brain allows your fingers to type out vote reform without many thought processes going on between your brain and your fingers when you're typing out. Why people don't realise that Reform is basically a reformed Brexit party, I don't know. I wonder whether people are starting to make a connection between Reform candidates and failed really right-wing Tory people. That could turn out to be one of the biggest mistakes that Reform or Mr Farage have ever made, is welcoming all those people into his party. Sooner or later, people are going to realise that when they vote for Reform, they're not getting anything new. They're getting something that's been tried over and over again ever since 1979 and Mrs Thatcher became Prime Minister.
Most of the polls that I've been looking at tend to agree that it's going to be a Plaid Cymru-led government, if not an outright majority, then at the very least a minority government. What do you think they can bring to the table that Labour aren't necessarily right now? And where in the ladder do you think Welsh independence is going to come in terms of priorities?
It's not going to be a priority in the first term. I think the first job of a Plaid First Minister will be to prove competence. And like it or not, the biggest test for that is going to be the NHS, getting down waiting lists. What I hope a Plaid group would do is to look at ways of boosting the economy. We don't have many tools devolved in terms of boosting the economy. We can't control interest rates. We don't have our own currency. But what we could do is to look for ways of cooperating more with other devolved regions around Europe. So what I know Plaid will do is to, in general terms, be more European. Wales for Europe is recommending that the incoming government should appoint a Minister for Europe or an international minister. He or she can't be a foreign secretary because international affairs aren't devolved. But international relations in the sense of building up business links and looking for ways of facilitating student exchanges, for example, and cultural exchanges, pressing the UK government to get closer to Europe in terms of the performing arts and getting actors and musicians moving between borders. This is the sort of thing that a international minister in the Welsh cabinet could be looking at, as well as looking for all the opportunities of regional development funding. When we came out of the European Union, there wasn't, and there still hasn't really been, a proper substitute for the regional development funding we used to get from Brussels. And far from being, as it's very often characterised or caricatured as bigwigs in Brussels making decisions on Welsh people's behalf and passing them down, my experience when I was a county councillor and sitting on committees which handled European funds, my experience was that it was very bottom up. We decided locally what our needs were in regional development funding, and we fed that back up, and the funding came down without anybody in London interfering. And there wasn't any of this nonsense of somebody in London saying that a high-speed train that goes from London to almost to Birmingham is going to benefit Wales, so we can't have any separate spin-off funding because we're going to get some benefit from this line somehow. So that sort of gatekeeping nonsense was eliminated. It's been inserted back in. There's been a certain amount of pork barrel politics when the Tory government was still in power. And to be honest, the new Labour government haven't improved on that much. The amount of funding is a lot less than it used to be, and the prioritisation isn't as good as it used to be. The number one priority should be which of these projects is going to give the biggest return and going to increase GDP per head in Wales more. And that sort of analysis, as far as I can see, isn't done.
Thank you very much for all that, Charles. It does sound like it's definitely going to be one of the elections to watch for a multitude of reasons. Thank you very much for joining us on the Bylines Network podcast. Join us next time, post-elections, where we'll be joined by Charles and hopefully Martin to go over the election results and comment upon each other's election results, and maybe laugh at the Conservatives if we feel like it, because I get the feeling we're going to need it.
Please keep an eye out on our socials on Friday, where we will be covering the results of the English, Scottish and Welsh elections. See you then.
Until then, listeners, I've been Julian in Bristol.
I've been Chris in London.
I'm Charles in Bridgend on the Mediterranean South Wales coast.